Good morning and thanks to each of you for attending today. A special welcome to Natalia Fabra, our first speaker, and Laura Diaz-Anadon, our other keynote speaker, who will be delivering the closing address. I want to express my sincere appreciation to both of you for being with us today. For the past 2 years, we have had the pleasure of hosting this symposium in this beautiful building with pictures from Museo del Prado. Museo del Prado is the most important museum we have in Spain that is situated in Madrid. This building at the heart of the University of Barcelona, and indeed at the heart of the city. In this 12th edition, our focus is on, as you know very well, accelerating the net zero economy transformation, new challenges for sustainability. The goals and measures of the green industry are a response to technological, innovative, and climate policy challenges in addressing environmental degradation. This approach leads us to consider the seminal works of Neuhaus and later contributors. Perhaps, sure, today we have one. It's a priority to drive innovation that facilitates progress in sustainable transition and achieves the goals of 2030 and 2050. From this perspective, policies should be aimed at preventing environmental disasters through direct technical change from a semi-glue approach. This entails advocating for a political intervention that redirects technical change toward environmental friendly technologies and addresses climate change. The next few years are essential to align the rapid development of clean energy technologies with the construction of a truly sustainable and socially fair development model that will allow for decarbonization by 2050. And this calls for debate about incentives and sustainable innovation, efficient functioning of markets, and regulatory measures and tools for putting net zero industry in the lead. And now is the moment to look at the tables. The first, shared by Rafael Domènech, Head of Economic Analysis of BBA Research, and Professor of Economics of the University of Valencia, is focused on sustainable innovations. The speakers approach the topic from various perspectives: impact of environmental regulation on sustainable innovation, sustainable development with circular methods, circular production methods, and financing constraints and sustainability investments, and the last point, natural capital accounting. Albert Rouget from Max Planck Institute and Pama Sen from Oxford University, Mattia Guerini from the University of Brescia, and Francois Cohen from the Chair of Energy Sustainability and Barcelona University will present the research. Table 2, shared by Monica Giulietti, Professor of Industrial Economics at Nottingham University, will debate market efficiency, the challenge of electricity market and system reform is central to the papers. In this way, the presentation addresses the role of interconnections, the storage and relationship with renewable energies, and the mitigation of carbon leakage. Cristina Pizarro from Ananas Damunt from the University of Basque Country, David Cerezo from Carlos III University, and Carlota Masciandaro from the University of Groningen will present their contributions. And the last table analyzes new energy policies and regulation shared by Professor Tora Hamas from the Copenhagen School of Energy Infrastructure. Natalia Collado from Complutense University and Monica Giulietti from Nottingham University will discuss in their respective papers the success and failure of policies to face rising energy prices. Javier Ferri from the University of Valencia will assess the welfare effects of energy transition policies, and Tobias Albrecht from the University of Barcelona will focus on governmental decentralization and deployment of renewables. I am sure that the outstanding contributions presented today will open up a great debate. Thank you very much again to the chairs for your groundbreaking work. And now, it's my pleasure to introduce Natalia Fabra. Natalia is Professor of Economics at the University Carlos III. She's a research fellow at the Center for Economic Policy Research and associate member of the Toulouse School of Economics. She belongs to the Economic Advisory Group on Competition Policy of the European Commission. She obtained her PhD at European University Institute. Natalia works in the field of industrial organization with an emphasis on energy and environmental economics and regulation and competition policy. She, as all of us we know, she has published in the top reviews as American Economic Review, Management and Science, the Rand Journal of Economics, the Economic Journal, Energy Economics, the Journal of Industrial Economics, and among many others. Natalia is an associate editor at the Economic Journal, the Journal of the European Economic Association, and the International Journal of Industrial Organization. And in 2014, Natalia received 2 distinguished awards as Spanish Best Young Economist. In 2017, she was awarded an ERC, all of us, we dream in this award, ERC Consolidator Grant, with the project Current Tools and Policy Challenges in Electricity Markets for 2018 to 2024. Natalia has been a visitor research fellow at several institutions: University of California Energy Institute, Berkeley, Nuffield College, Oxford, the Toulouse School of Economics, Northwestern University, Chicago, among many others. Currently, Natalia is an independent board member of the Spanish Gas Transport System Operator, president of the European Association for Research in Industrial Economics, and president of the Spanish Economic Association. We are fortunate, very fortunate, to have one of the greats with us today to talk about unpacking the distributional implications of the energy crisis, lessons from the Spanish electricity market. Natalia, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maite, for your very kind words, as well as for your invitation. The venue is really very, very nice, so I'm very grateful for being here. Can you hear me well, or no?
Somehow with the macro.
Better? Yeah.
Oh yeah, no more help.
Maybe too much. Hopefully it's better now. Excellent. So I'm going to be standing here. We are meeting today to discuss about the new challenges for sustainability, and it's difficult to establish a ranking. There's so many challenges and so challenging all of them. But probably if I would highlight one is the social feasibility of the policies that we put in place, and this is certainly related to the distributional implications of those policies. Today I won't be talking precisely about sustainability per se. I'll be talking about the energy crisis, but I'll be discussing about the distributional effects of that crisis, and hopefully some of the results that we get, some of the lessons that we get out of this crisis, as well as from the market interventions that were put in place, also inform the conversation and the discussions surrounding sustainability and the distributional implications of energy and climate policies. This is joint work with Clement Leblanc. Let me start with something that is very well known, probably is already part of history, the fact that over the last 2 years, gas prices skyrocket, already starting in the spring of 2021, that is well before the invasion of Ukraine. Gas prices started to increase from a historical average of 17, 18 to something around 100 before the invasion, and approaching 300 euro per megawatt hour during the summer of 2022. In this audience, I don't have to explain why the increase in gas prices had a very important impact on electricity markets. We'll know that electricity is produced out of different generation technologies, of which gas has the highest variable cost, meaning that gas generation is going to be the price-setting technology. So whatever happens to the marginal cost of gas generation is going to be passed on to the electricity market price that all the generating plants are going to earn, regardless of whether they burn gas or whether they don't. Clearly, this was passed on to electricity markets across Europe. Clearly, the evolution of electricity prices very closely mimics the evolution of gas prices. Here you can see the prices in France, Germany, Italy, and UK. Wonder why Spain is not in there, because Spain is different. It was also different this time. If we plot the evolution of electricity market prices in Spain, we can see that they follow the trends in all other European exchanges right until the summer of 2022, when the government put in place the so-called Iberian solution that succeeded in decoupling electricity market prices from gas prices, therefore allowing Spain to enjoy much lower prices compared to the rest of European countries. I'll be more precise about what the reform meant and how it was implemented, but let me just give you a very quick overview of how it was designed. In essence, the gas generating plants would be subsidized by the excess of the gas price above a reference price that was set equal to 40 euro per megawatt hour initially, and then in 2023 it went up until it got the level of 70 euro per megawatt hour. So this implicitly implied that the marginal cost of generating gas was no longer a function of the gas price in international markets, but rather was a function of 40 euro per megawatt hour, the price that was chosen as a reference. These led the gas generation facilities to reduce the price at which they were willing to produce electricity, leading to a reduction in the market clearing price that was earned by the other facilities. Consumers had to subsidize the difference between the gas market price and the reference price. So in net terms, the impact on what consumers paid to the gas facilities was unchanged, but this measure allowed to reduce the inframarginal rents of the inframarginal producers. So in this work, we are interested in analyzing the distributional effects of the energy crisis with a focus on the electricity market, as well as the distributional implications of the market intervention that took place in the Spanish electricity market. And I'm going to be looking at the distributional implications of the energy crisis and the market interventions in two dimensions. I'm going to be looking at the distributional effects between generators and final consumers. This is something that pertains to what is happening in the wholesale electricity market. And then, because consumers, and here I'm going to be focusing on households, they are different, there's heterogeneous effects of the energy crisis and the market intervention across households. So I'm also going to be measuring the distributional implications across households. That is something that pertains to the retail electricity market. Let me give you a bit more of a detail. When I focus on the wholesale market impacts or the distributional impacts between electricity consumers and firms, I need to construct two sorts of counterfactual scenarios. I want to understand what would have been the wholesale electricity markets without the gas crisis. That is what I'm going to be calling the crisis effect. And then I want to understand what would have happened had the government not put in place the market intervention. That is, I need to measure, I need to construct a counterfactual on wholesale electricity market prices without the intervention. This is going to allow me to compute the transfers from consumers to firms as a consequence of the energy crisis and the reduction in those transfers as a consequence of the market intervention. When I look at the distributional effects across households, that is within the retail market, again, I need to compute the crisis effect and I need to compute the intervention effect. In this case, I will have to recompute the electricity bills that households would have paid in the absence of the crisis, as well as in the absence of the intervention. And here I'll be particularly concerned about trying to uncover the mechanisms that underlie the different bill impacts that various households across Spain suffer. What about the approach? In order to construct these counterfactual wholesale electricity market prices, I'm going to simulate the Spanish wholesale electricity market under more precise, 5 different scenarios. In particular, I'm going to construct the factual scenarios under all the variables that were actually observed. I'm going to construct the no-intervention scenarios to measure how would the wholesale electricity market have performed in the absence of the intervention. What about if the intervention had put in place early when the crisis started? Remember, keep in mind from the first figure that I showed, that the intervention was put in place in June 2022, but electricity market prices started to increase already by the spring of 2021. So what about if the government had put in place intervention not in 2021, but instead in the summer of 2021? How much would consumers have saved? And then I'm going to construct a no-crisis scenario to really try to understand how much did the crisis cost to consumers and how large were the transfers that consumers had to make to firms as a consequence of the gas crisis. In order to recompute the electricity bills, I know this can be a bit of a nightmare whenever we receive our electricity bills at home. We refer to that as the bill shock because there are so many components out there. I'm not going to force you to understand all those components. I just want to draw your attention on this line, which is the coste de la energía, the energy cost, which in Spain, for many households, for the households who are on the default real-time tariff, is computed as the product of their hourly consumption times the hourly electricity market price in the wholesale market. So really, I'm going to keep all these bill components as given, and I'm just going to change this line of the bill by using the simulated wholesale electricity market prices that I obtain under this simulation. So I'm going to recompute the bills, keeping in mind that keeping the quantities, this is important, fixed, that is implicitly assuming that household electricity demand is inelastic in the short run, and I'm going to recompute this cost de la energía using the simulated electricity market prices under those scenarios. Let me give you a bit more of the detail, go deeper into the wholesale market effects. Without bothering you with all the effects, let me just, again, very quickly summarize what the effects are going to look like. The distributional effects due to the crisis have to do with the fact that, on the one hand, consumers have to pay higher prices to cover the higher cost of gas, but also these higher prices imply higher inframarginal rents for those producers. Therefore, in net terms, the impact of the crisis is going to be this blue rectangle, which is going to be transferred from consumers to firms. When it comes to the market intervention effect, as I said before, again, the net effect on the reduction in the prices paid to gas producers was completely offset by the fact that that production had to be subsidized. So the true net effect was the reduction in the inframarginal rents of the inframarginal producers that didn't have to be subsidized, yet they receive a lower market price because of the effect of the subsidy on the price setting plans. So I'm going to try to capture and quantify and measure these inframarginal rents that went up due to the crisis and were reduced due to the market intervention. The market intervention, it clearly reduced the transfer from consumers to firms, as I already said, but had some additional effects. The first one, which I think is very important to highlight, is that the market intervention didn't distort efficiency. In essence, all the gas-generating plants got a subsidy that was computed as a function of an exogenously given efficiency rate of the gas-generating plants equal to 55%, regardless of the actual efficiency of each of the plants, meaning that, in essence, what this implied was an inward a reduction in the supply function, so that the ranking across the generating plants was not distorted. This is important because the government put in place a measure that had a distributional implication without jeopardizing the achievement of productive efficiency. Yet, there were other distributional implications that I measure in the paper, but I'm not going to highlight in this presentation for the sake of time. There were some distributional implications across countries. In particular, French consumers benefited from this measure. Why? Because the fact that the prices in the Spanish wholesale electricity market went down implied that the price difference across the two countries got larger, and we pay those congestion rents, half of them, to the French TSO, which eventually end up benefiting the French consumer. So to the extent that this price difference, this price was larger, this was to the benefit of French consumers. There's been quite a lot of debate in Spain and in Europe as to whether this market intervention increased exports and emissions. And here, I think that rather than jump in and say, yes, it increased gas generation because our prices were lower and therefore these must have increased exports, we really have to think about the interconnection. And here we have to understand whether the interconnection was congested or uncongested. It is true that had the interconnection been uncongested in the absence of the crisis, in the absence of the intervention, sorry, the reduction in the Spanish price would have triggered higher exports and higher electricity production in Spain in order to meet those increased exports. And to that extent, it might have increased emissions. Let's keep in mind that in any event, if we were replacing gas-fired generation in France with gas-fired generation in Spain, this meant simply a transfer of emissions from France to Spain, but not necessarily a global increase in emissions. On the other hand, if the interconnection would have been congested, even in the absence of the crisis, even if the market intervention implied that prices in Spain were lower, this could not have triggered an increase in exports, given that the line would have been congested in any event. What was happening in France during that time, as you might remember, France was going through a crisis with many of its nuclear reactors in trouble, and many of them were not available, meaning that prices in France would have been very high in any event, so probably the interconnection would have been congested in any event. This is something that we can only answer with our counterfactual scenarios. If we want to understand what would have been the exports in the absence of the crisis, to understand whether the market intervention increased exports or not, we have to simulate the market to understand the state of the interconnection in the absence of the crisis. And this is why I think that this approach is particularly valuable. So let me give you a view of some of the impacts that I measure in the wholesale electricity market. As you can imagine, to simulate the electricity market, I take into account a large amount of data comprising all the characteristics of the Spanish power plants, the prices of gas, coal, CO2 prices in international markets, the hourly renewable availability of the renewables in Spain, as well as the hourly electricity demand in Spain. I compute the market equilibrium on an hourly basis, because I'm going to consider 2 years from the summer of 2021 to the summer of 2023. I am simulating 2 years, each of them comprised of 8,760 hours, and I'm considering 5 different scenarios, so you can imagine that the amount of simulations included in this analysis is big. And with these simulations, I managed to obtain the following results. So what you're seeing here, the black line represents the factual scenario. That is what really happened. You can see the impact of the reform when it was put in place and gas prices were no longer the reference, but rather the reference market price. And the red line that you see here, this is the simulated counterfactual scenario in the absence of the intervention. So the area between these two lines captures the market intervention effect. That is, by how much the market intervention allowed to reduce market prices. Clearly, the intervention was put in place in the summer of 2022. What if the intervention had been put in place in the summer of 2021? We would also have saved a big chunk of the price increase that we saw during 2021. And what about if we had not suffered a gas crisis? Here I compute 2 sets of scenarios for the no crisis scenario, a lower bound and a higher bound. The higher bound assumes that gas prices in Spain remain at the historical average, but everything remains the same. But it is clear that in the absence of a gas crisis, not only gas prices in Spain would have been lower, also gas prices in France and in Portugal would have been lower, giving rise to lower electricity market prices elsewhere, therefore affecting trade among the countries. Also, when gas prices are lower, coal demand is lower, and if coal demand is lower, demand for CO2 permits is also lower, so also CO2 permits would have been lower. This means that clearly what happens in the gas market has a big impact on what happens in other markets for other commodities, and this has a further impact on electricity market prices. This is what I take into account in order to compute the lower bound of prices in the no crisis scenario. So really the difference between the black lines and the blue lines is capturing the effect of the crisis by how much prices increase as a consequence of the gas crisis. We can put these scenarios together, and we can see there's a clear ranking across these scenarios, and we can translate these into numbers. For instance, we can look at the price effects across years and across the different scenarios. And if we focus, for instance, in 2022, we can see that the market intervention allowed to reduce electricity market prices by 32%, without taking into account the subsidies, something that I'll do in the next slide. But even stronger than this was the impact that the crisis had on electricity market prices. In the absence of the crisis, the electricity market prices would have been more aligned with the historical average, and this shows that the crisis implied that the Spanish consumers paid between 2 times and 3 times higher prices than in the absence of the crisis. Clearly, this had a very important implication on the transfers from consumers to firms. So what you can see in this table is the difference between the earnings that firms made, their costs and their profits in the factual scenario relative to all the other scenarios. And for instance, if we focus on profits, we can see that had the government not put in place the intervention, firms' profits would have been, over these 2 years, 14 billion euro higher than in the absence of the intervention. But even starker than this is the comparison between the profits that firms would have made in the absence of the crisis. In the absence of the crisis, firms would have made between 26 and 34 billion euro. In other words, thanks to the crisis, the profits of the firms increase by those amounts. And this already takes into account the subsidies that were paid to the gas facilities. Let me focus now, let me move to the retail market effects. So here, as I explained before, I have recomputed the bills that consumers would have paid under these different scenarios as a consequence of what we just saw in the wholesale electricity market. So in order to do this, I'm going to be focusing on those customers on real-time pricing. In Spain, there's also a large amount of customers that have decided to opt out of the real price regime. These customers, typically, they're on a 1-year fixed price contracts, even though these prices remain fixed before the contracts are renewed. As soon as these contracts got renewed, these prices also reflected the increase in wholesale electricity market prices. So what I'm going to be saying regarding the customers on real-time pricing very much also applies to those customers in the free markets that renew the contracts. Which type of data am I using? I'm using this very valuable data source, Natalia, that provides hourly information on the electricity consumption of households at the zip code level, which is going to allow me to introduce a great deal of variation across Spanish zip codes. In order to recompute the bills, I'm going to take into account all the bill components. Some of them that are fixed, so that when I compare across scenarios, those cancel out. But some of them are proportional. So for instance, when we are talking about taxes, or when we are talking about electricity losses that have to be paid by consumers, all those components are proportional to the price increases or to the price changes, meaning that the price differences across scenarios get amplified due to these components in the bill that are proportional to those prices. I also use information on household income and household size at the zip code level. And very importantly, I use information on household characteristics, including their equipment, whether they have electric heating, whether they have air conditioning, and so on and so forth. So if I look at the aggregate effects, here what we can see is the increase in the annual household bills at the average level due to the crisis and due to the intervention. It shows that the crisis made an average representative Spanish household paid something between 350 and 450 euro more on an annual basis, and the intervention allowed consumers to save on an annual basis 100 euro. But in this table, we can also see that there's quite a lot of heterogeneity across consumers. So this is what I want to focus. I want to focus on where is this heterogeneity coming from, and what are the implications of this heterogeneity across households, across income beams. So what are the sources of heterogeneous bill impacts? First, different households consume different amounts of electricity during the year, and clearly when we affect prices, the impact are going to be stronger for those households that consume more. But it's not just about the total quantity, it's also about the consumption patterns. Different consumers consume different amounts at different moments of time within the day and across the year, and therefore the weighted prices that they're going to face very much depend on those consumption patterns. What are the determinants of the amount and the pattern of consumption? When we can highlight household income, we know it's very well known that there's typically a positive correlation between income and consumption, but also household size matters, location matters, because weather, sunlight, and so on and so forth depend on where we live and therefore affect how much electricity we need to consume, but also imply that we might have incentives and also the ability to have different equipment. So in places that are very cold, it might pay to install gas heating. In places that are warmer, maybe households prefer not to do such an investment and they rely more on electric heating, or there's warm places in Spain where most people have air conditioning. So installed equipment has a very important impact on how much we consume, and also very importantly on when we consume the electricity. That is going to have an impact on those distributional implications. So for you to see the role of these determinants, here I have one column reflecting the determinants of total annual consumption, and one column reflecting the demand-weighted average price faced by the households. And as it is expected, there's a positive correlation between income and consumption, but also between household size, the penetration of electric heating, and the penetration of air conditioning. But not only that, we can also see that wealthier households, they also tend to consume at times when prices are higher. And not only that, but the fact that more households have air conditioning and electric heating also implies that those households, not only they consume more, but they also consume more at times when prices are higher. So these determinants are going to be very important in explaining the distributional consequences of the energy crisis and the market intervention. Let me just give you two examples. This is the hourly consumption patterns within the day of two zip codes, one in Alicante and one in León in the north of Spain, a very cold place. And these are the consumption patterns of these two same zip codes across the year. And again, we can see that there's differences in the total amount of electricity, but very importantly on when they consume that electricity. So for instance, here we can see that reassuringly at night the two zip codes consume the same, but differences are much bigger during the daytime hours of the day, and particularly so across the year. Why? Because in Elche, which is in the coast, it is a warm place, they use quite a lot of air conditioning, while in Ponferrada they don't. But also in Elche they use more electric heating, probably because in Ponferrada they use more gas. So when it comes to the distributional effects of the crisis, for instance, here I plotted the increase in prices due to the crisis during the day and the increase in prices during the year, we can see that the increase in prices was relatively higher during the night, and also the consumption of the representative's household in Ponferrada was relatively higher during the day. Same applies when we look at the across-year effects. Price increases tended to be higher during the winter months, which is when the Ponferrada representative household, in relative terms, used to consume more. So this is just an illustration of why we're going to find important distributional effects across locations, as well as across households, across income bins, which is precisely what I want to show you next. I have computed the bill increases due to the crisis across national income bins. Here you can see the increase in those bills in levels. You can see a non-monotonicity here, which, as I can show you later, is explained by the fact that households in the second and third quintile, they tend to have more electric heating, they tend to rely less on gas, and probably they're also located in warmer places where they need air conditioning. But taking this non-monotonicity aside, what this figure is showing is that the bill increase was slightly higher for the higher income bins. But what I think is probably more relevant is not the impact in absolute terms, but rather the impact relative to income. If we normalize these bill increases by households' income, what we see is that the impact of the crisis was very regressive, because the amount of the household's budgets that had to be devoted for paying the increase in the electricity bills was much higher, and the schedule is quite steep, was much higher for the lower income households. For similar reasons, when we look at the bill impacts of the market intervention, what we see is that the market intervention allowed households to save, on average, something around 400 euro. The bill impact in levels was pretty uniform across income bins, which means that when we normalize by household income, the impact of the intervention was progressive. Why? Because it allowed low-income households to save a greater share of their income as compared to the higher income households. This is just to explain, when we look at the determinants of the bill, why we find this non-monotonicity. For the sake of time, let me jump this, and let me show you that this non-monotonicity disappears when we control for all these determinants, and we look at the impact of, for instance, the crisis or the intervention on the bills in levels or in relative terms. When we control for these determinants, this non-monotonicity disappears, and we see that monotonically it was the higher income households, the one that saw a bigger increase in their bill, but when we normalize that by household income, the impact of the crisis was clearly regressive, and the impact of the market intervention was clearly progressive. Clearly, this had implications not only across income bins, but also across Spanish provinces. The analysis is conducted at the zip code level, but to clarify the pictures, I aggregated this at the province level. And what you can see is that the crisis had a stronger impact in those places where there's more electricity consumption and also more electric and heating and air conditioning. But for the same reason, precisely those provinces that suffer a stronger bill increase also benefited from a stronger bill reduction due to the intervention. Therefore, when I refer to the distributional effects, it's not only across income bins, but very importantly, and probably politically sensitive, it had a very strong distributional impact across Spanish provinces. Let me just conclude with a quick overview of the results and some thoughts for future research. As I said, the energy crisis has given rise to important distributional implications. Notably, the profits of the Spanish electricity companies went up due to the energy crisis, and this was due to the fact that consumers' transfers increased due to the increase in the marginal price of the price-setting technologies. This led the Spanish households to increase their annual bills by something between 350 and 450 euro on average, and the low-income households were the ones that were most affected. The market intervention mitigated some of these effects, Only partially because it allowed to reduce profits of the Spanish firms by 14 billion, yet even taking into account the intervention, the Spanish companies increased their profits. This allowed to reduce households' annual bills on average by 100 euro, with large heterogeneities across households, allowing the low-income households to benefit the most relative to their income. So the main takeaway of this analysis, I would say, is that the crisis was highly regressive and intervention was progressive, meaning there's a scope for public policy to mitigate some of the distributional effects, which is an important lesson to take also when it comes to discussing about the challenges for sustainability. And this is what brings me to my last slide. The impact of gas prices on electricity market prices is just one of the potential shocks out there, but around the corner, there are many other shocks that will also have important distributional implications. Notably, the increase in renewable energy investment will push electricity market prices down, but this impact will not be uniform across hours of the day and across days of the year, therefore giving rise to lower prices, but also distributional implications across regions and across households. Climate policies, including, but not only, carbon prices or subsidies for electric vehicles, they're going to imply higher electricity consumption as we hopefully shift from consuming polluting fossil fuels to consuming electricity. This is going to push electricity demand up and might also have an impact on electricity market prices, again, giving rise to distributional implications that will also depend on the type of equipment that households have, because not all households can afford, for instance, buying electric vehicles or installing electric heat pumps. So again, income differences will have an impact on adoption, and this will give rise to distributional implications. Not to mention the impacts of climate change per se, which is having an impact on average temperatures, as we can experience today in Barcelona. And this will give rise to a wider adoption of air conditioning, again, impacts on total electricity consumption and impacts on consumption patterns, giving rise to distributional implications. So I think that a major challenge for us economists, for us researchers, is to try to understand and measure the compounded effect of all these developments on electricity prices, keeping in mind that distributional effects of those policies and the distributional effects of those developments will be key in order to get the society on board, or in order to have society blocking the streets because they oppose those policies. Considering the asymmetries in technology adoption will be equally important, because this will be one of the major determinants of the distributional implications of those policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Natalia, for your excellent research, marvelous presentation, and splendid results. Now we are going on the floor. Well, I suppose that is going to happen. Fantastic, by an order. The first hand I saw was Ana Pama. Okay, here, please. The macro, second row after my seat in the floor.
Oh, is this on? Thank you. Thank you so much, Natalia. That was a great presentation, very interesting content. So I just had two related questions, which touches upon the role of public policy. So the first question was, what if prices had been allowed to rise and there was no market intervention, and the renewable generators earned the inframarginal rent? Would that have prompted an investment effect and more investment in renewables, which would have then had an impact on the price eventually? That's the first question. And the second question was, you mentioned that the level of the price at which the intervention was made was an efficient level. It didn't lead to any market distortions. So what if, the second question is, what if instead of a price subsidy, the government had instead imposed a windfall tax on the generators for the rent above that price level and recycled the revenues back to consumers, might it have led to a similar level of savings among the households? So two related questions. Thank you.
And if you agree, there are a lot of questions. I propose, but we have not a lot of time, I propose to present all the questions, if you agree, and you answer after all them. Now I saw Frank Cohen and Farin. Yes.
Yes, so again, thank you very much, Natalia, for this very interesting presentation. So a quick question on the inelastic demand. So I wonder, if you could say something about this. And also, I think in Spain we had a change in VAT levels and the electricity tax, and I wonder how you dealt with this in the model, or if you could do something about it. Thank you.
Sorry, Javier Ferri. And after Elisa Trujillo, someone, in order to, you have time to, I can see the face of the,
Yeah, my question was very related with the two previous questions. So we are in a period of transition to net zero, as this is one of the title of the conference. So one question is related precisely with the inelasticity of the demand you are assuming, okay? And it is related also with the other question of what, so if instead of implementing this subsidy, you were thinking about some kind of transfer scheme address towards the lower income, okay? So in that sense, you wouldn't have this effect which is contrary to the net zero, because you are supporting artificially the high demand in a period in which prices go up, and you will maybe better target the effect, the worst distributed effect on household, okay? And my question is also related with the first one. You try to lower the profits, the windfall profits firms, okay? But profits play also a role in terms of, maybe it's good for incentivizing investment and investment in green energy that drives this, at some extent, this energy transition, okay? So I think your work is more detailed, is extraordinary, but I think the focus maybe is not the correct one in terms of policy. I would prefer another one.
Thank you. Now is the Lisa time.
Okay. My question is related to one of your assumptions, as the others. Basically, the fact that at the moment and during the time of your study, the 60% of the consumers that are potentially subject to the regulated price are actually under fixed contract. And you assume that all the population was on the regulated price. How do you think that this fact is affecting your results?
Thank you. Mike? And Pablo, the last.
Okay.
Lunch, huh? I don't want to steal that. This is super exciting. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so two questions. One is, in the wholesale market, how much is bought forward? I think you're sort of assuming that everything is bought at the market price, but Yeah, I'm not sure how big the forward market is in Spain, but you know, there may well be effects of that both at the beginning and at the end of the intervention. And the second one is, this is a bit of a jokey question in a way, but you talked about the Iberian solution, but I think Iberia actually covers 2 countries, and I was wondering about the other one that you didn't mention at all.
Thank you. Pablo.
Well, thanks a lot for a very nice presentation. It was just maybe a suggestion rather than a question. It's you talk about 4 drivers of household consumptions, the size, income, location, and type of equipment that you use. There's a lot of discussion lately on age, you know, pertaining to the, you know, to consumption, household consumption patterns. I think that I was wondering if you consider the age of the household breadwinner in this, or if you could do it, maybe you can do it in the next, you know, in the next research. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, I think I'm the one who thanks you, because all the questions were extremely relevant and extremely interesting, and certainly they give us food for thought. Let me put some of them together, starting with the $1 million question, which was also part of the conversations during the energy crisis. It is great that firms are making these huge profits, because this is going to lead them to invest. So eventually these investments are going to bring green energy, and they're going to bring lower prices for consumers. Economic models typically assume hit and run quick, rapid, instantaneous free entry, so that there's no windfall profits, because as soon as there's one technology that makes these inframarginal rents that I was pointing out, there's going to be entry until these profits get diluted. This is just an artifact of our models, of our assumptions, to try to make the analysis simple, but this is not part of reality. Probably the increasing prices could have triggered some investments, but when are these investments gonna be online? When we talk about socially feasible and politically feasible time periods, certainly 2-3 years of a crisis, and during this crisis, none of these investments has yet been online, have been extremely costly, and extremely costly not only for consumers, not only triggering increases in energy poverty, not only pushing inflation up and therefore contributing to increasing interest rates and all the broad economic implications that this might have had, but also, and I'm very concerned about this, they might have delayed the adoption of low carbon technologies by firms and consumers, because at the end of the day, the price of electricity is an important determinant of this adoption. So it's not at all clear to me, rather the opposite, that the increase in electricity market prices has contributed to the energy transition. And I think this is an important lesson that we as economists have to keep in mind. Try not to firmly believe in the results on our models when our models are based on assumptions that are not verified in practice. I fully agree with your suggestion about the windfall tax. The intervention that was put in place was only one of the potentially possible interventions, and there could have been others, as long as they had targeted the main part of the problem, which in my view was the increase in inframarginal rents. So a windfall tax could have done the job in a very similar way, but again, we also have to keep in mind that there are some solutions that are politically feasible and others that are not. And I think we have also seen during the crisis, not only in the energy sector, but also in the financial sector, that it is extremely difficult to put forward taxes that truly capture the massive inframarginal rents that these firms have been making during the crisis. So in theory, I agree with you. A windfall tax could have been just as good or even better, but the question is whether when we put political economic considerations on the table, we could have achieved a tax that would have reduced the rents of these producers as much as the Iberian solution did. The question regarding demand being inelastic, I totally agree. So the main reason why I assume inelastic demand was first a time constraint, and second, even without these time constraints, I think there's good reasons to believe that while not being perfectly inelastic, electricity demand in the short run is highly inelastic, and this is something that I have shown in previous papers with Mark Rewant and David Rapson. I agree that crisis periods are different, whereas we obtain that zero elasticity for a period without a crisis. During the crisis, the elasticity might have been higher. Clearly, the elasticity need not be constant along the demand curve. And for that reason, we've been fortunate enough to have Olaluth give us a huge amount of hourly consumption data for a large panel of Spanish households, consumption data during the crisis. So we are currently working hard on trying to estimate the elasticities during the crisis, and this is probably something that we can combine with this work to incorporate what would have been the distributional effects, taking into account this demand elasticity. By the way, the main source of demand elasticity is not really response to short-run prices, but rather it is the adoption of solar panels. Something that we are also looking into is the adoption of solar panels during the crisis, which, as you know, was extremely relevant, and we're also looking at the distributional implications of that solar adoption. And what we see is that solar adoption is an important source of demand reduction, at least demand reduction from the grid, and therefore it is, in a sense, a measure of demand elasticity that mostly benefited the high-income households. So probably, if I take this into account, the distributional implications of these are going to be more pronounced. You also ask very importantly about the changes in other bill components, including the VAT, but not only. The transmission and distribution charges were significantly reduced during the crisis in order to mitigate the bill impacts on the Spanish households. That is extremely relevant. I don't take this into account in my analysis because I take those changes as given. If I computed the true bill impact, taking into account not only the changes in wholesale electricity market prices, but also the changes in taxes and other regulated bill components, the impact of intervention would have been stronger. That is, the saving on those bills would have been larger. The reason why I don't do this is that at the end of the day, these are transfers between taxpayers and consumers, and what I really wanted to highlight is the transfers between consumers and firms. Mike, you are absolutely right. There were forward contracts. Some of these forward contracts are also the fixed retail prices that households in the free market are subject to. There's very little information about these forward contracts, also little, even though I have some. I plotted it here. What you can see in this figure is the evolution of the fixed prices in the free market, which is the dark line, versus the spot market price. And as you can see, before the crisis, there was a big wedge between the two. And as soon as the spot market prices start increasing as a consequence of the gas prices, also the prices in the retail market go up in the same way. So it is true that during the crisis, some customers still had old contracts, and therefore they were not suffering the increase in the electricity market price. But as soon as those contracts get renewed, the gas price increase gets passed on to the free market price with a big difference. Now, those households that are in the default real-time scheme, they are already enjoying from lower electricity prices, whereas those households that renew their contracts during the energy crisis, probably they're still on those very high prices. This is just to say the free market, or the fact that some customers are on fixed prices, doesn't change the nature of the problem. It simply delays and creates some inertia that somehow is captured, even though the timing is not the same when we analyze the impacts on households in the real-time scheme. Last, I take it home as part of my homework, which is to incorporate age. We have information on age distribution by zip code, so we certainly can take that into account when analyzing the determinants of consumption and consumption patterns. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Congratulations.